The red instrument lights cast almost nothing, just enough glow to read the altimeter, the airspeed indicator, the exhaust gas temperature gauge, and beyond those dials, pure black. No moon, no horizon line. The canopy might as well have been painted over. Captain James McInerney kept his scan moving across the panel because outside the glass there existed exactly 0 visual references. Somewhere below, at maybe 4,000 feet beneath the aircraft, the jungle canopy of southern Laos stretched unbroken in every direction. And somewhere in that canopy, trucks were moving. A captured North Vietnamese logistics officer told his interrogators something remarkable in 1966. "We own the night," he said. "The Americans cannot find what they cannot see." The debrief report from the Combined Document Exploitation Center in Saigon recorded that phrase without commentary. The analyst who typed it up underlined the word own. He had reason to believe it. For years, the Ho Chi Minh Trail functioned as a nocturnal supply artery feeding men, ammunition, rice, and fuel into South Vietnam through a network of roads and paths threading through Laos and Cambodia. NVA convoy commanders learned the rhythm of American air power early. Daylight meant danger. Fighter bombers roamed the skies in 12-hour cycles, and anything caught in the open during those hours burned. So, the convoys adapted. They moved after dark, running without headlights on roads memorized by drivers who had made the trip dozens of times. Trucks staged under triple canopy jungle. During the day, engines cold, tarps spread over cargo beds. At dusk, they rolled. Most of these crews tell the same story if you track down their accounts. The night felt like armor, and darkness itself became doctrine. If you're watching this and these missions mean something to you, hit like and subscribe. Drop a comment if someone you knew flew night interdiction. These sorties don't show up in the Hollywood version of this war, and the only way they stay visible is if people keep finding them here. The NVA had good reason for confidence. Early American night interdiction efforts over the trail amounted to fumbling in the dark, sometimes literally. Forward air controllers in slow-moving O-1 bird dogs dropped flares that drifted on the wind and illuminated the wrong ridgeline. Strike aircraft orbited above, waiting for a target that had already pulled off the road and killed its engine. The whole system depended on catching a convoy in the narrow window between flare ignition and flare burnout, and convoy drivers got extremely good at stopping cold the instant they saw magnesium light bloom above the trees. Pull over, cut the engine, wait 4 minutes, drive on. The success rate for these early night strikes hovered somewhere around 15%, depending on which report you trust. One Air Force after-action review from 1965 called the results inadequate to the point of irrelevance. Their words. What the logistics officer and his convoy commanders did not account for, could not have accounted for, because the capability barely existed when he made that statement, sat in the bomb bay and the nose of a particular variant of the Martin B-57 Canberra. The B-57B had entered the war as a conventional light bomber, a Korean War-era airframe that nobody mistook for cutting-edge technology. Twin-right J-65 turbojets, a tandem cockpit, straight wings that made it stable at medium altitude but unspectacular in every measurable performance category. The Air Force had nearly retired it twice, but someone at Tactical Air Command had a different idea for the airframe. The B-57B became the B-57G, and the G carried something the night had never encountered over the Ho Chi Minh Trail: infrared detection equipment, low-light television sensors, a laser target designator, and moving target indicator radar. 4 separate systems designed to do one thing: find trucks in the dark and kill them without flares, without moonlight, without any visual contact at all. The aircraft that the Air Force almost scrapped turned into the most effective night truck killer of the entire war. Between 1968 and 1972, B-57G crews destroyed or damaged thousands of vehicles along the trail network, flying missions in conditions that would have grounded any other tactical aircraft in the inventory. The NVA owned the night until they didn't. The Canberra is a fine aircraft, General Curtis LeMay told a congressional subcommittee in 1953. It is not, however, a strategic weapon. That single sentence nearly killed the program before it started. The original design belonged to the British. English Electric built the Canberra as a high-altitude light bomber for the Royal Air Force, and it flew beautifully, stable, forgiving, capable of holding altitude for hours on modest fuel consumption. The Glen L. Martin Company secured a license to manufacture the airframe in Baltimore, designating it the B-57, and the first American-built models rolled off the line in 1954. Strategic Air Command took one look and passed. LeMay wanted jets that could carry nuclear weapons to Moscow. A twin-engine light bomber with a 7,000-pound payload and a combat radius of 900 miles held zero interest for a man building a nuclear strike force. Tactical Air Command inherited the fleet almost by default. The B-57 ended up flying conventional bombing missions, reconnaissance sorties, and whatever odd jobs nobody else wanted. By the early 60s, entire squadrons sat in storage at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, baking in the desert sun with their engine intakes covered in foil tape. The airframe had logged roughly a decade of institutional indifference. Then, the war changed. The interdiction problem along the Ho Chi Minh Trail demanded something no aircraft in the active inventory could provide: long loiter time over a target area, enough payload to matter, a two-man crew arrangement that let one aviator fly while the other operated sensors, and the structural margins to carry heavy electronic equipment in a modified nose section. Fast movers like the F-4 Phantom burned through fuel too quickly. The A-26 Invader had the loiter time, but lacked the speed to survive in defended airspace. Colonel Edward Grubb, who helped draft the initial Tropic Moon program requirements at Eglin Air Force Base in 1966, put it bluntly in a memo to 7th Air Force Headquarters. "We need an aircraft nobody is using for a mission nobody has flown." The B-57 fit both criteria. Martin's old bomber could cruise at 280 knots for 4 hours over the trail, carry cluster munitions and 500-pound bombs simultaneously, and absorb the weight penalty of forward-looking infrared sensors without critical performance degradation. 16 airframes came out of storage at Davis-Monthan. Maintenance crews at Westover Air Force Base stripped them to bare aluminum, pulled the standard bombing systems, and began cutting holes in the nose sections for sensor windows that hadn't been designed yet. Nobody at the Pentagon had planned on resurrecting LeMay's castoff, but the B-57 was what they had, and it could do what nothing else could. 12 trucks pulled out of Binh Tram, 29 at 17 minutes past 6 in the evening on March 4, 1969. The lead driver, according to a post-war North Vietnamese military history published in Hanoi, flashed his taillights twice, the signal for the convoy behind him to begin moving at 40-meter intervals. No headlights. The road surface had been graded by a labor battalion 3 days earlier, packed laterite clay that held up under rain better than the dirt tracks farther south. Each truck carried approximately 2.5 tons of ammunition in wooden crates lashed to the bed with hemp rope. The convoy would cover 68 kilometers before dawn, park beneath camouflage netting strung between mahogany trees, and wait for the next sunset to do it again. This particular convoy represented a droplet in a river. The Ho Chi Minh Trail by 1968 had evolved from a network of jungle footpaths into something that more closely resembled a national highway system hidden under forest canopy. The Strategic Transportation Directorate, Group 559, named for its founding date in May 1959, administered the entire operation with a bureaucratic rigor that American intelligence analysts found frankly impressive. The level of organizational sophistication exceeds anything we anticipated, read a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment from late 1967. Group 559 divided the trail into bin trams, way stations spaced roughly a day's drive apart, each functioning as an autonomous logistics node with its own fuel depot, vehicle repair facility, medical station, and anti-aircraft defenses. By 1969, the system encompassed over 12,000 miles of roads across eastern Laos and northeastern Cambodia. Somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 trucks operated on those roads in any given dry season. Sources conflict on the exact figure. Hanoi's own records, declassified in the 1990s, list different numbers depending on the ministry reporting them. The drivers made the system work. Most had trained for weeks at transport schools near Vinh, learning to navigate by starlight and by feel. They memorized road surfaces the way a blind person memorizes a house. This curve banks left and drops. This stretch has 2 potholes on the right side, spaced 10 meters apart. This bridge flexes under load so slow to walking speed. A driver named Nguyen Duc Thang, interviewed decades later for a Vietnamese state television documentary, described running a fully loaded ZIL 157 through a mountain pass at night without lights as listening to the road. He meant it literally. Tire noise on packed clay sounded different from tire noise on gravel, and gravel sounded different from mud. When the sound changed, you adjusted. Experienced drivers claimed they could feel the edge of the road through the steering column. The cargo volume staggered American planners. During the 1968 dry season, roughly October through April, an estimated 10,000 tons of supplies per month flowed south along the trail network. Ammunition, rice, medical supplies, replacement troops walking in organized groups of 40. Porters carried loads on modified bicycles reinforced with extra crossbars, pushing 300 pounds of cargo along paths too narrow for vehicles. Some segments used bamboo pipelines to pump fuel from storage bladders hidden in limestone caves. The whole apparatus ran on a simple assumption that had held true for years. Darkness provided sufficient protection against American air power, and dispersal across thousands of route segments made comprehensive interdiction mathematically impossible. The math supported them. A single truck moving without lights on a road beneath triple canopy jungle at 2 in the morning occupied a footprint roughly 8 feet wide and 20 feet long. The trail network spread across a geographic area larger than Massachusetts. Finding that truck from the air at night with 1960s technology required either extraordinary luck or a capability that did not yet exist in operational form. NVA logisticians understood these odds intuitively. They built redundancy into every route segment. If one road got cratered, traffic shifted to a bypass within hours. Engineering battalions pre-positioned gravel and timber at choke points to repair bomb damage overnight. The 16 B-57Gs sitting on the ramp at Phan Rang Air Base in late 1968 carried a combined sensor suite that changed those odds entirely. The NVA had built their logistics empire around a single vulnerability they didn't know they had. October 14, 1963. A modified RB-57E lifted off from Tan Son Nhut Air Base, carrying an infrared line scanner bolted into its belly. Equipment so classified that the ground crew who loaded it had been told only that the pod contained weather instruments. The mission designation read Patricia Lynn. The crew flew a north-south track over the Mekong Delta at 11,000 feet, and when the film came back to the photo interpretation lab at Tan Son Nhut, the analysts sat quiet for a long time. Every hooch, every cooking fire, every diesel engine that had run in the previous hour showed up as a white bloom against the cool jungle background. Human temperature signatures dotted the tree line along a canal where South Vietnamese patrols had reported nothing. The infrared scanner saw body heat through vegetation, recently driven vehicles parked under thatch roofs, things the human eye could not see in broad daylight, let alone at night. The original Patricia Lynn mission set ran reconnaissance only. Fly the track, collect the film, land, develop, interpret, brief. The turnaround time from sensor to analyst to field commander averaged 14 hours on a good day. The infrared imagery confirmed what everyone suspected. The enemy moved massive quantities of material under cover of darkness. But confirmation and interdiction occupied entirely different categories of usefulness. Knowing trucks existed on a road segment at 2 in the morning meant nothing if the strike aircraft couldn't arrive until 9. By then, the trucks sat under trees, engines cold, invisible again. Colonel William Grubb, Edward Grubb's predecessor on the sensor integration team at Eglin, wrote a terse evaluation in February 1965. "We have proven we can see in the dark. We have not proven we can kill in the dark." The file containing that memo sat in a safe at Tactical Air Command headquarters for 2 years before anyone acted on it. Tropic Moon changed the equation. The program ran in 3 phases. Tropic Moon 1 put a forward-looking infrared sensor and a low-light level television camera into the nose of a B-57B and sent it to Phan Rang in the spring of 1967. The concept sounded simple. Give the navigator bombardier a real-time infrared picture of the ground ahead, let him find the trucks, then drop ordnance on them in a single pass. No flares, no forward air controller, no 14-hour wait. The reality proved more complicated. The early FLIR units generated a grainy, smeared image that bounced with every turbulence bump. Distinguishing a truck from a warm rock outcropping required an interpretation skill that most crews hadn't developed yet. Tropic Moon 1 scored a handful of confirmed kills, but spent more sorties debugging equipment than destroying targets. Tropic Moon 2 refined the sensors, better resolution on the infrared display, a stabilized television camera that compensated for aircraft motion, improved mounting hardware that reduced vibration-induced image blur. The kill rate climbed, but the real leap came with Tropic Moon 3, the B-57G. Westinghouse built the integrated sensor package, a N/AAD-4 forward-looking infrared in the nose, feeding a cockpit display the navigator could read in real time, a N/ASQ-1-45 low-light television with enough sensitivity to produce usable imagery under starlight alone. No moon required. A N/AP Q-1-39 moving target indicator radar that detected vehicles by their ground speed differential against the static terrain. And the pièce de résistance, a laser target designator that could mark a point on the ground with enough precision to guide munitions directly onto a single truck. 4 systems operating simultaneously, cross-referenced by a navigator sitting 18 inches behind the pilot, building a composite picture of the road below from data streams that each revealed something the others missed. The FLIR showed heat. The television showed shape and context. The radar showed motion, and the laser provided the killing geometry. "It felt like cheating," said Captain Edward Howell, a B-57G navigator with the 13th Bombardment Squadron. "You'd pick up a convoy on the radar, confirm it on the FLIR, switch to the TV to count vehicles, then put the laser on the lead truck. The whole sequence took maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds from detection to weapons release. The Patricia Lynn crews in 1963 needed 14 hours to get their imagery into a commander's hands. The Tropic Moon 3 crews compressed that entire kill chain into the time it takes to boil water. The trucks rolling south along the trail in late 1968 had no way of knowing that the faint engine sound above them belonged to an aircraft that could already see them, had already counted them, and was computing a release solution. When the flares popped, you could read a newspaper down there, said Major Robert Spencer, a pilot with the 8th Bombardment Squadron, who flew 73 night interdiction sorties over the trail between November 1968 and April 1969. The problem was that everything you could see could also see you. The B-57G didn't always hunt alone. On high-priority route segments, the mountain passes near Mujia and Karai, the river crossings south of Chapon, 7th Air Force ran coordinated strike packages that paired the sensor-equipped bombers with C-130 flare ships orbiting at higher altitude. The choreography followed a brutal logic. All B-57G would arrive on station first, running dark at 8,000 feet, scanning the road below with its FLIR and moving target indicator radar. The navigator would locate the convoy, count the vehicles, identify the lead and tail trucks, then radio the flare ship with coordinates and a heading. The C-130 would roll in from the opposite direction, dropping 2 million candle power Mark 24 flares on parachutes at staggered intervals along the convoy's path. Each flare burned for approximately 3 minutes. The light hit the ground like a stadium flood, turning on in the middle of a forest. What happened next followed the same pattern almost every time. Headlights. The drivers, startled by the sudden daylight overhead, instinctively hit their brakes and killed engines that were already running dark. But some, the less experienced ones, the ones who had been cheating by running with parking lights on low stretches where they thought no aircraft could see them, scrambled to switch off lights that betrayed their exact position on the road. The FLIR caught the heat signatures regardless. The low-light television, suddenly flooded with illumination from the flares, produced imagery sharp enough to distinguish a ZIL 157 from a GAZ-63 by the shape of its cab. Spencer described the TV picture under flare light as better than daylight because everything had this flat, shadowless quality that made vehicles pop against the road surface. The first pass belonged to the B-57G. The pilot would roll into a 30-degree dive, the navigator calling altitude and airspeed corrections while keeping the laser designator locked on the lead truck. Weapons release came between 4,000 and 3,000 feet. Cluster bomb units for soft targets, Mark 82 500-pounders for bridges or hardened storage points, napalm canisters for fuel trucks. The CBUs opened at a preset altitude and scattered bomblets across a footprint roughly 200 feet long and 80 feet wide. A 12-truck convoy stretched over approximately 500 meters of road. One pass with cluster munitions could disable the front half. The second pass caught the drivers who had already bailed out of their cabs and were running for the tree line. Napalm on the remaining vehicles ensured that anything carrying ammunition cooked off for hours. The flares drifted on their parachutes, swinging gently, casting moving shadows that made the jungle canopy ripple like water. Burning trucks added their own light, orange and black against the white magnesium glare overhead. Anti-aircraft fire came up almost immediately from guns pre-positioned along the route, 37mm tracers rising in streams that looked beautiful and moved too slowly to track at first. Then whipped past the cockpit with a sound one navigator compared to ripping canvas. The B-57Gs took hits regularly, fuselage panels punctured, hydraulic lines nicked, wing skins perforated, fuel cells weeping avgas into the slipstream. The Canberra's twin-engine configuration meant a single hit rarely proved fatal. Lose one right J-65, and the other still produced enough thrust to limp back to Phan Rang, or divert to Nakhon Phanom across the border in Thailand. After-action reports from the 13th Bombardment Squadron for the 1968-69 dry season document 211 confirmed truck kills attributed to B-57G crews operating with flare support. The reports use a classification system, destroyed, damaged, or probable, and the intelligence staff applied it conservatively. A truck counted as destroyed only when post-strike imagery or secondary explosions confirmed it. Major Spencer's own logbook records 17 destroyed in his 73 sorties. On his best night, February 9, 1969, his crew caught an 8-truck convoy stalled at a ford crossing on Route 911 in the Laotian Panhandle. The lead truck had thrown a track into the mud. The rest sat bumper to bumper, engines idling, waiting. Spencer's navigator put the laser on the lead vehicle at 02:14 hours. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes. Captain James Gruenhagen's navigator was already calling trucks, trucks, trucks before the aircraft leveled off at 7,500 feet over Route 912. The FLIR display showed 14 hot signatures strung along a straight segment of road south of Shavana, each one a white rectangle trailing a faint thermal wake where exhaust heat pooled against the canopy overhead. Gruenhagen banked left to set up an orbit. His navigator, First Lieutenant Paul Kaminsky, began sequencing through the sensors, FLIR, to television, to radar, and back, confirming that all 14 vehicles moved south at roughly 15 miles per hour. The date, January 22, 1969. The operating area, Steel Tiger, the designation 7th Air Force used for the southern Laotian Panhandle below the 17th parallel. Steel Tiger and its subsector Tiger Hound together constituted the most intensely interdicted airspace on the planet that winter. Every night between October 1968 and April 1969, 7th Air Force's Tactical Air Control Center at Tan Son Nhut allocated between 200 and 300 sorties to the trail network. F-4s out of Ubon and Da Nang, A-26s from Nakhon Phanom, C-130 gunships orbiting the passes, B-57Gs hunting convoys in the kill boxes below. But the B-57G crews drew the assignments that mattered most, the kill boxes over road segments, where intelligence predicted the heaviest convoy traffic on any given night. Igloo white sensors, the acoustic and seismic devices airdropped along the trail by Navy OP-2Es, fed data to the Infiltration Surveillance Center at Nakhon Phanom. Analysts there tracked activation patterns in real time and vectored strike aircraft to the hottest segments. The B-57Gs arrived with their own sensor suite already painting the picture. The NVA drivers entered a surveillance environment so dense that their odds of passing through undetected had collapsed to something close to zero on priority segments. Groenhagen's crew worked the 14-truck convoy for 26 minutes. Kaminsky put the laser on the lead vehicle first, CBUs across the front 4 trucks. Secondary explosions on the second vehicle confirmed ammunition cargo. The fireball rose high enough that Groenhagen saw it with his naked eyes through the canopy, not just on the sensor displays. He came around for a second pass. Kaminsky shifted the laser to the 8th truck in line. The convoy had stopped moving entirely now, drivers abandoning vehicles and scattering into the trees on both sides of the road. 5 more trucks destroyed on the second and third passes. On the 4th pass, 37mm fire opened up from a gun position roughly 800 meters east of the road. Tracers climbed through the aircraft's altitude band, but passed behind the tail. The gunners were aiming at engine noise, not at a radar return, and the Canberra had already moved through the sound's origin point by the time the rounds arrived. 9 confirmed destroyed out of 14. Kaminsky logged the engagement in shorthand on his kneeboard card. The after-action report filed the next morning at Phan Rang lists the coordinates, the ordnance expended. 6 CBU-24s, 2 Mark 82s, 2 BLU-27 napalm canisters, and a terse damage assessment. Sustained anti-aircraft fire from single site, no damage to aircraft. That same week, B-57G crews across the 8th and 13th Bombardment Squadrons destroyed or damaged over 60 trucks in the Steel Tiger area alone. The Infiltration Surveillance Center's data showed something the individual crews couldn't see from their cockpits. Convoy scheduling along priority route segments began fragmenting. Where NVA logistics planners had previously dispatched convoys of 10 to 15 trucks at regular intervals after sunset, the pattern shifted to smaller groups of 3 or 4 vehicles departing at irregular times throughout the night. Spacing between vehicles increased from 40 meters to over 100. Some convoys reversed course entirely when acoustic sensors detected aircraft engines overhead, a defensive reaction that cost hours of movement time and burned fuel the NVA could not easily replace. Group 559's dry season throughput targets started slipping. A captured logistics officer from Bin Tram 33, interrogated at a facility near Kontum in March 1969, told his debriefers that his station had received only 40% of its scheduled fuel deliveries since January. "The road is death," the interrogation transcript reads. The officer used a Vietnamese phrase that the translator rendered more precisely in a marginal note as "the road eats drivers." Groenhagen flew 41 more sorties before rotating home. Kaminsky flew 53. Between them, their crew accounted for 31 confirmed truck kills across the 1968 through 69 dry season. Those 31 trucks carried an estimated 77 tons of supplies that never reached their destination. Mujia Pass sits at 1,500 meters elevation, where the Annamite Range buckles between 2 limestone ridges, and on the morning of February 12, 1969, the smoke rising from its southern approach could be seen from 20 miles away. A reconnaissance RF-4C out of Udorn crossed the pass at 0742 hours, flying at 18,000 feet, cameras running. The photographs, now declassified and held at the National Archives facility in College Park, Maryland, show a road that had ceased to function as a road. Craters overlapped in clusters of 4 and 5, their edges merging into irregular ponds of standing water where the laterite surface had collapsed into the substrate below. 17 vehicle hulks lined a 2-kilometer stretch of Route 12 between the pass summit and the first switchback on the Laotian side. Some had burned completely, reduced to bare frames sitting on deflated tire remnants. Others still smoked, thin gray columns rising vertically in the windless morning air before shearing east at altitude, where the upper-level flow caught them. 3 of the trucks still had their headlights on. The reconnaissance photographs captured them as pale circles against the blackened cab fronts. Batteries still connected, filaments still glowing, power running through electrical systems that no longer served any purpose. The drivers, who had switched those headlights on in panic when the first flares ignited overhead, were gone. Dead, fled into the jungle, buried under debris. The photographs don't say, and the records don't either. But those headlights kept burning into the morning like some kind of accidental memorial, pointless and impossible to look away from. The previous night's strikes against Mujia had involved 4 separate aircraft. 2 B-57Gs from the 13th Bombardment Squadron, 1 AC-130 Spectre gunship, and a C-130 flare ship. The engagement window ran from 01:15 to 03:50 hours. The first B-57G, crewed by Captain Lawrence Hodge and First Lieutenant Michael Drennan, had detected a 22-truck convoy approaching the pass from the North Vietnamese side at approximately 12 miles per hour. Drennan's after-action narrative describes the FLIR picture as a string of pearls, evenly spaced thermal signatures stretching back along the road toward the border. Hodge set up his orbit. The flare ship dropped its first Mark 24 at 01:22. Within seconds, the convoy fractured. Lead vehicles accelerated toward the pass summit. Rear vehicles braked and attempted to reverse. Middle vehicles stopped dead. The AC-130 opened fire with its 40mm Bofors from 12,000 feet, walking rounds down the center of the road in a methodical pattern that the gunship's fire control computer calculated to place 1 round every 15 meters. The sound of that gun reached the ground as a low rhythmic thumping, not the sharp crack of smaller weapons, but something felt in the chest cavity, a concussive pulse that arrived slightly after each muzzle flash overhead. Hodge rolled in behind the gunship's fire and put CBUs on the vehicles that had tried to push through the pass. Drennan kept the laser steady, 6 trucks destroyed on the first pass. The second B-57G, arriving on station 40 minutes later, caught the survivors still trying to clear wreckage from the road and added 5 more kills. 11 confirmed destroyed, 6 damaged, 5 listed as probable. 22 trucks had entered the Mujia corridor that night. At most, a handful reached the far side. The RF-4C pilot, who photographed the aftermath, Captain Dennis Reardon, according to the mission log, made 2 passes over the site. His backseater operated the KS-72 panoramic camera and the KA-56 low-altitude framing camera simultaneously. Reardon reported secondary explosions still occurring on his second pass, nearly 5 hours after the last strike aircraft had departed. Ammunition stores in at least 2 trucks continued to cook off, sending debris arcing above the tree line in irregular bursts. The smell of burning rubber and diesel fuel reached his cockpit at 18,000 feet. That detail appears in his debrief transcript. He underlined it. Mujia Pass reopened to traffic 3 days later. NVA engineering battalions filled the craters with gravel and timber, dragged the hulks off the road with hand winches, and smoothed the surface enough for trucks to pass single file. The convoys came again the following week, smaller now, spaced wider apart, moving faster through the pass with their headlights off. They learned faster than we expected, Colonel Edward Grubaugh, commander of the 8th Tactical Bombardment Squadron, wrote in his end-of-tour report dated June 1969. By March, the trail we were hitting looked nothing like the trail we'd started hitting in November. The smaller convoys and wider spacing that appeared after the Mujia losses represented only the first layer of adaptation. By mid-February, Igloo white sensors along priority route segments began registering acoustic signatures that didn't match any known vehicle profile. Engine noise too steady, too uniform, running at constant RPM without the throttle variations that a driver navigating a mountain road would produce. Strike aircraft dispatched to investigate found trucks, all right, Burned-out hulks from previous engagements, dragged back onto the road surface and fitted with small gasoline generators bolted to the cargo bed. The generators ran at a fixed speed, producing enough noise and heat to trigger acoustic sensors and give a plausible infrared return on FLIR displays. Decoys. The after-action report from a B-57G crew that expended 4 CBU-24s on a line of 6 such decoys near Ban Reving Pass on February 28 contains a single editorial comment from the navigator. Wasted sortie. The real convoys moved on parallel routes cut through virgin jungle, sometimes less than a kilometer from the monitored roads. NVA engineering battalions carved these bypass segments in 72-hour bursts, working under triple canopy cover that blocked overhead observation, then abandoned them after a single night's use. Group 559 also shifted scheduling. Instead of dispatching convoys exclusively between sunset and 0400 hours, trucks began moving during the brief tropical twilight periods, 45 minutes after sunset, 45 minutes before dawn, when the transition between daylight and darkness degraded both optical and infrared sensor performance. FLIR imagery during twilight showed a cluttered thermal picture as the ground surface radiated stored solar heat, making vehicle signatures harder to isolate against the warm road. The anti-aircraft defenses changed character entirely. Through December and January, NVA gunners had fired reactively, opening up after an aircraft attacked, aiming at sound, hoping for a lucky hit. By March, the gun crews along Steel Tiger's priority segments operated planned ambushes. They positioned 37mm and 57mm batteries in interlocking pairs along road segments where B-57Gs typically set up their attack orbits, pre-registered their fire at altitudes between 3,000 and 8,000 feet, and waited. The bait varied. A lone truck might run with its headlights on, moving slowly, practically begging to be struck. Other times, a cluster of thermal signatures turned out to be oil drums filled with hot water, arranged to mimic a parked convoy on the FLIR display. The crew that took the bait and rolled into a dive attack flew directly into converging streams of fire from positions they hadn't detected. Captain Wayne Wilkerson, 13th Bombardment Squadron, caught a 57mm round through his left wing on March 14th during a pass on what his navigator had identified as a 5-truck convoy near Chapone. The trucks turned out to be empty frames, positioned around a central gun pit. The round entered the wing's upper surface just outboard of the left engine nacelle, passed through the main spar, and exited through the lower skin without detonating. A dud, or a round fused, for a slightly different altitude. Wilkerson felt the impact as a hard shudder followed by a vibration that didn't stop. He nursed the aircraft east for 90 minutes on reduced power and landed at Da Nang with a spar crack that the structural engineers later said came within 6 inches of catastrophic failure. The maintenance report uses the word miraculous. The Tropic Moon program adapted in turn. Software updates to the moving target indicator radar allowed navigators to filter out stationary thermal sources, reducing the effectiveness of hot water decoys. Crews developed new approach profiles, offsetting their orbit from the target road by 2 to 3 miles, denying the gun crews the predictable flight path they needed for pre-registered fire. Attack runs shifted from the 30-degree dives that had proven so effective against undefended convoys to shallower 15-degree passes initiated from higher altitude, reducing exposure time in the flak envelope. The trade-off meant less accurate weapons delivery. Bomb patterns spread wider, requiring more ordnance per truck killed. Grubaugh's end-of-tour report quantifies the cost. Trucks destroyed per sortie dropped from 1.2 in December to 0.7 by April. Ordnance expended per confirmed kill nearly doubled. Anti-aircraft encounters per mission tripled. 2 B-57Gs took damage severe enough to require depot-level repair. One crew diverted to Nakhon Phanom with both hydraulic systems failing and landed on emergency brakes alone, the aircraft trailing a mist of red hydraulic fluid that ground crews could smell from the flight line, a sharp, acrid chemical bite that lingered in the nostrils for hours. The B-57Gs kept flying, the convoys kept coming, and the arithmetic ground on, indifferent to both. Between November 1968 and April 1969, B-57G crews claimed 12,068 trucks destroyed or damaged across the Steel Tiger and Tiger Hound operating areas. 7th Air Force's own intelligence analysts cut that figure roughly in half, applying standard verification discounts for nighttime bomb damage assessment, double counting across overlapping sorties, and the inherent optimism of crews reporting through FLIR imagery rather than visual confirmation. The adjusted number, approximately 6,000 confirmed destroyed, still represented something staggering. 6,000 trucks at an average cargo capacity of 2.5 tons meant 15,000 tons of ammunition, rice, fuel, and medical supplies subtracted from the pipeline feeding NVA and Viet Cong forces in South Vietnam, Cambodia, and southern Laos. 15,000 tons across a single dry season. The entire annual requirement for a frontline NVA division ran to roughly 6,000 tons. The B-57G program alone, by 7th Air Force's conservative math, denied the equivalent of 2.5 divisions' yearly sustenance. Senior Colonel Nguyen Van Thuong commanded a transportation regiment under Group 559 during that same period. Captured near the Ai Shao Valley in August 1969, he spent 4 months at a combined interrogation facility before American debriefers extracted what they considered reliable testimony. The classified summary, portions of which appeared in a Defense Intelligence Agency assessment circulated in January 1970, records Thuong's statement that his regiment lost 61% of its vehicle fleet between December and March. Not to all causes, to air attack specifically. Thuong distinguished carefully between mechanical breakdown, road accidents, and strikes from above. He told his interrogators that his drivers had developed a vocabulary for the different aircraft that hunted them. The F-4 they called the Screamer for its engine noise in a dive. The AC-130 they called the Dragon for its streams of tracer fire spiraling down from the dark. The B-57G they called Nothing. They had no name for it. The men did not hear it before the bombs fell, the transcript reads. They did not see it. They called it the one you cannot name, because to speak of it invited it to come. Thuong's regiment started the dry season with 230 trucks. By late March, he operated 89. Replacement vehicles arriving from depots north of the DMZ took 6 to 8 weeks to reach his sector, and roughly a third of those replacements never arrived either. Destroyed en route through the same kill boxes his own convoys had learned to dread. The math compounded. Every truck lost meant not just its cargo gone, but the fuel burned positioning its replacement, the engineering hours spent repairing the road it died on, the anti-aircraft ammunition expended defending the wreckage site from follow-up strikes. Thuong estimated his regiment's effective throughput at 35% of its planning target by the time the monsoon rains shut down major convoy operations in late April. Interdiction campaigns have a dirty secret. The trucks that got through still mattered. 35% throughput kept NVA units in the field, kept weapons flowing south, kept the war grinding forward. The B-57G didn't stop the trail. Nothing stopped the trail. But Thuong sat across a table from American intelligence officers and said, without prompting, that the invisible bomber hurt his regiment worse than any other weapon system in the American arsenal. The DIA analyst who compiled the assessment underlined that sentence twice and wrote in the margin, "First-time source has volunteered this distinction." What happened to the 16 B-57Gs that flew out of Phan Rang? The airframes survived the war, most of them. They came home to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where ground crews drained their fuel, sealed their intakes with silver tape, and parked them in rows on the desert hardpan. The Tropic Moon sensors, the FLIR units, the laser designators, the moving target indicators that had cost millions to develop and integrate, got pulled and crated for classified storage. The aircraft themselves sat in the boneyard sun and slowly bleached. The program produced no aces and no Medal of Honor recipients, no names that anyone outside a narrow circle of aviation historians would recognize. It generated no iconic photographs. A truck burning on a dark road in Laos doesn't frame the way a Huey silhouetted against orange sky does. The missions themselves resisted narrative. Two men in a cockpit staring at a green and white screen, calling out thermal signatures by grid coordinate, dropping ordnance on targets they confirmed destroyed only through the same screen that found them. Repetitive, technical, effective, unglamorous. Everything that makes for poor television. 4 B-57 crewmen died in Tropic Moon operations between 1968 and 1970. Their names appear in the official loss records, but not in the broader literature of the air war. Sources conflict on whether a fifth crew should be attributed to the program or to a conventional daylight mission flown in the same aircraft type. One B-57G survives intact. It sits in the National Museum of the United States Air Force at Wright-Patterson, restored to its Tropic Moon 3 configuration with the sensor nose and the black-painted undersurfaces. The placard beside it runs about 200 words. Visitors walk past it on their way to the F-105 and the F-4, the fighters they came to see. The Canberra looks small between them, almost dainty, its thin wings and narrow fuselage belonging to a different era of aerodynamic thinking. The sensor windows in its nose have been painted over. You can't tell from the outside what made this particular aircraft different from every other bomber of its generation. Robert Spencer, the pilot from the 8th Bombardment Squadron who flew 73 night sorties and described the flare-lit trail as bright enough to read a newspaper, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 1981. He gave an oral history interview to the Air Force Historical Research Agency in 1994. The interviewer asked him what he wanted people to understand about the Tropic Moon missions. Spencer took a long time answering. The transcript notes a pause of several seconds before he spoke. "We killed a lot of trucks. We saved some guys on the ground who never knew we were up there. And we flew into the dark every night not knowing if tonight was the one where the dark hit back. That ought to count for something."